Thank you all for coming.
You're welcome.
I want to say welcome to you all for coming. This is our 52nd TDL event, and also the first event for our fall session. The title is The Impact of Microorganisms on Human Evolution. Our speaker today is Pierre Hirsch. We're going to be talking about modern, the effect of microorganisms in terms of modern human evolution, approximately the last 10,000 years. The field of study is evolutionary biology, and the field is not that old, only goes back to Darwin. It's a building trend of study in recent years as people are able to study microorganisms more and more. So I'll turn it over to Pierre. Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you, Ethan, for that introduction. And so I would like first to come back on the title, which is Impact of Microorganisms on Human Evolution. So what about microorganisms? They are defined by their size, right? So basically these are small animals, small organisms. But it doesn't have no real scientific value, because usually in biology we like to put organisms in groups, right? And how closely they are related. It's called phylogeny. So microorganisms, it's a bunch of different animals. You have fungi, protozoa, bacteria, of course, and viruses. And there's still hot debates about viruses, if they belong, if they are life forms or not. So, but I put them in the title as well. And also I'll be talking about helminths, which are those worms that infect your stomach. And you can see them with the naked eyes. But still I regroup all those organisms under the term of microorganisms. So the impact of those organisms on human evolution. So you probably know that evolution is basically the survival of the fittest. The fittest here means the individual the most adapted to its environment. And so, for example, those individuals will survive and transmit their genes. So, basic example, if an individual is resistant to disease, he's going to survive, the other one will die. So that's the basic mechanism. And there's never been a time in human history when we were not in contact with pathogens or microorganisms. There's always been around us. They've been on Earth long before us. And so I'm going to talk about the evolution, human evolution, and so we are called Homo sapiens, right? And still we are the same species, we are called Homo sapiens, but we evolved a little bit. And basically I'm going to talk the evolution we had since the Neolithic. The Neolithic is that period of time when we first invented tools and agriculture. And before Neolithic, we just used to live in small groups in tropical savannas, so it was a constant environment. It was always the same pathogen. But after the Neolithic, we started to build villages and live all together, right? And that's when the first outbreaks of diseases like measles, influenza, or smallpox occurred. And the other thing is, like, we live very close to livestock. So we live close to poultry, to ruminants, all those animals that transmit diseases. And also, that's when we disturb the local ecosystems, because we build fields, we plow the soil, we started mining, so we disturb the environment. So more and more, for example, insect vectors, mosquitoes started to live around these places, and much more rodents, like small rats or mice that can transmit, for example, cholera. So it's going to be like, from that period, how humans responded to that change of environment, and what strategies we basically adopt to be more successful in those environments. And so one of the first point would be, for example, fertility. Fertility is the mean number of offspring, the mean number of childs per woman. And of course, it's very different depending on countries. Like in Taiwan, it's kind of low actually. I think it's 1 point something. But in countries like Africa, it goes to 5, 6. And some studies address that matter. And they wanted to find out if there was a link with the intensity of the diversity of pathogens and the fertility. And of course, in countries with a high diversity of pathogens, women tend to have a higher fertility. It's a compensative response to that pressure from the parasites and viruses and diseases. And so the higher diversity in infectious diseases, the higher is the fertility. And a consequence of that is also the sexual dimorphism. So sexual dimorphism is the relative difference of size between males and females. And because in those countries with high fertility, there's much more chances of having obstetric, that's what you say? Yes, to have obstetric fatal problems, right? Like giving birth and either the mom dies or the child dies. And so it has been shown that sexual dimorphism in countries with high fertility is not that high because smaller women was selected against because there are more chances to have those kind of problems. And so taller women were selected. And so in countries with high pathogenic pressure, the sexual dimorphism is not that high. Whereas in developed countries such as the West or Taiwan, Japan, the sexual dimorphism is more pronounced. Okay. Another point, but that's much debate on this one. It's about menstruation. So I'm going to precise what is menstruation for Ethan. Menstruation is it's at the end of the ovarian cycle. In many primates, not only humans, there's a loss of blood and shedding of the uterine lining. And so some people thought that it could be a way to reduce the infection by the sperm in the oviducts and in the uterus by cleaning every month these parts. But there's no real consensus, and people might say now it's a non-adaptive trait. So there's no evolutionary significance for menstruation. So we still don't really know about menstruation. Anyway, another thing would be the fluctuating asymmetry. So fluctuating asymmetry is when people tend to have symmetrical traits, right? From left to right, we have similar arms, similar eyes. And maybe you heard that study. It has been shown recently that people tend to prefer the people with really symmetric faces, right? And that happens, the building of the symmetry happens during the development of the embryo. And if there's a lot of parasites or pathogens, the embryo has to fight these infections. So the immune system uses a lot of energy. And so there's less energy left for the developmental homeostasis. So somehow asymmetry or symmetry could show the good immune system of people. And that might be a point in why people like symmetrical faces, because probably they have better immune system or come from non-parasitic places. This is more my field. It's about sleep. I study entomology there in Taipei, and I study the sleep of the cockroach. I know it's weird, but that's what I do. And basically sleep is a very tough question. We still don't know why we sleep. We don't know. Because when we sleep, we cannot forage, we cannot mate, and we are very vulnerable to predators because we're not moving or anything. So we still don't know why we sleep. There's many theories. But to come back to that talk, people say that it's known that sleep deprivation makes you much more vulnerable to diseases. And so one of the functions of sleep might be just to put all other functions at rest and to give the immune system energy. So it would just be a time where you don't use that much capabilities and just put your body at rest for the immune system to have more energy. Another point would be the spices in cooking. Like people tend to say, oh, spices have some antimicrobial function. So it might be linked to the presence or not of pathogens. And if it's the case, there's two expectations we expect. The first one would be that in warmer countries, where the food is more likely to get infected, they would use more spices. And also in countries where they use a lot of meat, they would use more spices because meat is much more easy to get spoiled than vegetables. And so there's been a study that they compared 2,000 recipes from 36 countries, and they found out indeed that it's correlated to the weather of the country. So the warmer the country is, the more spices they use, as well as if they use more meat, they use a lot of spices. So I used to live in Ethiopia, and that's really the case, because it's pretty hot there, and they are big meat eater. But it's really spicy. Ethiopian food is really spicy. Okay. The next point would be about pregnant women. You know probably that during the first 3 months of pregnancy, usually women have nausea and vomiting problems. And that would be because that's just when the embryo starts to develop organs. And so for the woman not to reject the embryo as a foreign body, her immune system is kind of down. There's immunosuppression so that it doesn't reject the fetus, right? And so that nausea and vomiting behavior would be a pathogen avoidance behavior, because they have the immune system kind of low. They try not to eat meat or just vomit it or have nausea when they see those food that might carry parasites. So that might be an explanation for nausea and vomiting in pregnant women. Another point, again, would be the diversity of languages and cultures, and that would be in the tropic regions. As you know, in tropical regions, there's a higher parasitic presence, and so those population, to avoid contagion, they try not to disperse that much, and they develop kind of xenophobia, because people from other groups could carry germs they're not used to and thereby die. That's basically what happened when the Europeans conquered South America. We killed them just by talking to them, by giving them germs. And so in those tropical regions, people would kind of live in small fragmented groups, and that of course develops new languages, and people would acquire and have their own culture. People say also that, well, I don't really agree with that. I mean, I think it's too complex, that the IQ could change depending on the frequency of parasites and the diversity of infections. So yeah, basically they said in that paper that in countries with a high parasitic, many infectious diseases, the IQ would be lower. And once again, that would be during the developmental time of the embryo, because there's a lot of infectious disease the embryo has to fight. It uses a lot of energy for the immune system, and maybe it wouldn't have enough energy to develop brains and structure like that. But that's don't really, I mean, I think it's too complex. That's the problem with evolutionary biology, especially in humans. There's so many factors, sometimes it's hard to see what's what. And then, what about somatic diseases? Basically, somatic diseases are non-parasitic infections. So that encompass cancers, cardiovascular diseases, and mental illness. And so, in the 70s, the World Health Organization thought that maybe 1% of cancers could be from parasitic infections. But actually, we found out now, we think that 20% of cancers might be from parasitic infections. And for example, the liver cancer, you might know that it can be caused actually by the hepatitis virus, the B and the C. So not by whiskey. And as you know, maybe the healthy cells have basically three mechanisms to avoid becoming cancerous. So one of that mechanism is that they only divide, those cells in our body, only divide when they are told to. The second mechanism is that they can commit suicide. Okay? When there's too many genetic mutations, they commit suicide. It's called apoptose. And the third mechanism is they have a limited number of divisions, so they cannot reproduce infinitely. That's one of the problems of cancers. The cells just get crazy and reproduce infinitely. And because those viruses or bacteria, they kind of want to hide from our immune system. So what they do, they get into our cells and they change the machinery, right, of our cells. And sometimes it's no problem. You just get rid of those bacteria by taking some antibiotics. But sometimes it can cause a cancer. So basically, more and more, we think that more and more somatic diseases, cancer, mental illness, can be caused by infectious diseases, by parasite viruses. And another example is schizophrenia can actually be it can be developed after being in contact with the herpes virus. And this is prenatal or postnatal, so something that comes early in life. But some viruses can cause very serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia or autism. Actually, more and more people think autism has a parasitic origin. And so we can see that somehow, though we've lived with parasites around us forever, and so we developed either behaviors or genetic adaptations for that. And now I will talk about Darwinian medicine. So far I was talking about the bad bacteria, now I'm going to talk about the cool bacteria, the one we like, the one we couldn't live without. And so the basic idea is that to consider individuals as an ecosystem, because only in our gut we have 100 trillion bacteria in our gut. So that's huge, and it's 10 times more than we have cells. So we basically have more bacteria in our bodies than cells. And from a gene point of view, we have about 23,000 genes in our DNA, but if we encompass all the genes from those bacteria living in us, it's about 3 million genes. So you can see we have 23,000 genes, but all the bacteria living in us, the good bacteria, have 3 million genes. And basically, in exchange for raw material and shelter, they help us and protect us. It's a commensal relationship. And we call that the microbiome. And microbiome, so it's all those bacteria living either on our skin or on small orifices or in our gut. It's called the microbiome. And the idea is that perturbance of that microbiome, of that ecosystem, might trigger diseases in you because it's a very thin equilibrium, and that it could be disturbed. Sorry. And so it's a very growing field, actually. It's maybe 5 years old. People started to think about that, like, oh, maybe we should consider all those bacteria living in us. And the idea, all that microbiome could be considered actually as a human organ. Because if you weigh all those bacteria, it's about 1 kilogram, which is pretty heavy. And of course, there's no shape. We think usually organs, they have shapes. But the immune system can also be considered as an organ, but it's full of cells working everywhere in the body. It can still be considered as an organ. So that microbiome could be considered as an organ. And so there's many groups of bacteria in the world, but the ones living in our body, there's only 4 different groups. And they all have kind of specialized biochemical ways. So it's pretty precise. And we know that for a long time, and basically they help us process food, right? There's many things we cannot process, or many amino acids, for example, we cannot synthesize. And those bacteria do the job for us. So they are very, very important. And yes, for example, obesity now. Some studies have been done on obese people and thin people, and they noticed that the microbiome of these obese people were different than of thin people. And that was, of course, for example, in the same region, in the same country, because the microbiome is very different amongst different people from different countries. But in the same area, if they eat approximately the same thing, obese people have different microbiome than thin ones. Mm-hmm. But if they go on a diet and start to get thinner, the microbiome will change as well. It will be the same microbiome as the thin people. And it's the converse is true. Like another study was done on twins, and like what's the number? About 50% of those twins, they had exactly the same diet, but one twin looked okay and the other one looked malnourished. So it's kind of puzzling why those two kids have the same diet and one looks very skinny and malnourished and the other one is fine. And they basically found out after checking the microbiome that there was a problem in the microbiome of one of them. Like maybe he lacked some bacteria that is normally there to synthesize proteins, and that bacteria wasn't there, but in the twin it was there. And most of that microbiome, we get it I think in utero we get some of bacteria from your mom, and also as soon as you get out, as soon as you pick up a lot from your mom as well, and then in the room you are, in the hospital you take a lot of them. So it's kind of random, and that might be one of the problems nowadays. Like maybe hospitals are too clean and we don't pick up enough bacteria when we are born. Whereas a long time ago, I mean, centuries ago in some countries, babies are still born in the family house, right? They don't go to the hospital. And so, yes, that's Darwinian medicine. I think that's basically it. It's about 20 minutes. So yeah, I'm welcome you to ask me questions, because maybe I went too quick on some points, or maybe it was not very clear.
No, that's good. Thanks, Pierre.